after all the community posts, after all the research, we're doing it! We're figuring out the best decade of music! So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I've always heard that music was a lot better back then, and as someone who is growing up in the not back then, I feel kind of defensive over my music, over our music. Our music's good, right? And today we put that to the test. Today we're seeing what is the best decade of music, if music really was better back then. So, here's what I did. Here's how I structured the experiment. I got 5 of the top rated albums. 5 of the 5 highest rated albums from the site Album of the Year. Pretty good site. I'm on there. So check out my profile. I made a community post about it. It's the person review. I ran out of characters, so I couldn't type the person who reviews. But yeah. Anyway, I got the 5 highest rated albums from Album of the Year for each decade, and then I listened through them. And today I'm going to be talking about what I found decade by decade. I will also be giving each decade a superlative, and I will use that as a talking point. But yeah, without further ado, let's find the best decade of music, shall we? So the 50s. The 50s top 5 is made up of 100% jazz albums. And outside of a couple Frank Sinatra hits, I had never heard a jazz song in my life. So, unless like Kendrick Lamar counts. And I don't count that. So, needless to say, I was a little nervous, but I was also a little excited to dig into these albums. So the first album I listened to for this entire video, the entire research I was doing for this video, was Kinda Blue by Miles Davis. And that album made me 100% excited, because it was fantastic. It was very fun. That album's so fun. It's a pretty, from what I understand about jazz, which is not a lot, but from what I understand about it, it's a pretty, basic jazz album. You have, the song structure is, main melody, solo, main melody, solo, main melody, solo, until the song ends. And that is how most of the songs on that album are structured. But it's still very good. It's very groovy, very fun, very upbeat, and it's very nice to have just music that you don't really have to dive too deep into. You can just put it on and have a good time. There's, I think, one bluesy track on there, but it's still a very fun track. And yeah, I mean, that album's really fun. Then we go to then we get Blue Train by John Coltrane, which has a very similar structure, but he also incorporates bass solos into his albums, which I'm not the hugest fan of, but still, this was a fantastic album. And then we get albums like Mingus which, I mean, that's Mingus by Charles Mingus. And Charles Mingus likes to incorporate a lot of different instrumentals. He's more of an experimental jazz artist. And now, I didn't know if I was completely ready for that, but this album is fantastic. And we also get albums like Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, which is less solo focused and more focused on the entire group playing at once. And that's also fantastic. And then we get the Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers album, which is also fantastic. And it's kind of, I think it mixes playing together and solos type thing. But that one's also a pretty generic jazz album, but it's still very fantastic. But yeah, overall these records, they're fantastic, and I think they're all 10s. They're all 10s. and they're all just so much fun. Whether even if it is like a more bluesy track, it's still very fun. And I mean, they're all very tight records. They're all under an hour at least, if not under 50 minutes. And yeah, they're just, yeah, I mean, what more can I say? I would say this decade is the decade that put me on the most because it opened the door to this whole new genre that I had no intention of checking out. But I forced myself to check out, and I had a blast checking it out. So, yeah, I mean, I had a great time listening to all these albums, and if you haven't listened to these albums, I would encourage you to do so, because, I mean, yeah, I found so much that I love about jazz, and yeah. Next up, we have the 60s, where we start to see a sprinkle in of rock albums, where we get albums like Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix. We get In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. And then we also get Abbey Road by the Beatles. So, yeah. But we also do see some more, the last few jazz albums. We get Giant Steps by John Coltrane. And we get The Black Sinner, Lady and the Saint by Charles Mingus. This decade, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm going to be giving each decade a superlative. So last decade was the decade that put me on the most. This decade is the most influential. And that's because we have albums like the jazz albums that I mentioned, which, if you look at the Charles Mingus album, that's a very experimental jazz album and helps like push the boundaries of jazz into some more creative spaces. And then we have like just jazz in general, which if we didn't have jazz, we wouldn't have rock. If we didn't have rock, we wouldn't have rap. We don't have rap. Where would we be? Like, you don't have my hip hop in 2024 videos, so honestly, it's a sad reality that we don't even want to imagine. But yeah. And then you have albums like Abbey Road, which influence cannot be denied. Like, that we still see that influence today in like in pop, in like like especially like the most obvious example, Tame Impala, who has been accused of sounding like John Lennon, I believe, or George Harrison, one of the two. I believe it's John Lennon though. Then we have prog rock albums like In the Court of the Crimson King and Jimi Hendrix Electric Ladyland, which helped push the boundaries of rock at the time, so that allowed us to, in later decades, expand on the boundaries that they pushed to create some more interesting albums. That being said, all these albums are also incredibly fantastic. It's not like they did something like influential, but the albums actually suck. But no, these albums are fantastic. Like, if we look at Abbey Road, that's probably one of the Beatles' most like diverse albums. It has Here Comes the Sun, which is this beautiful melody. Like, it's very like calm and beautiful and like soft. It's like, here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Then we have She's So Heavy, which is a freaking rock song. Like, it's for lack of a better word, heavy. And that song goes hard. That might be one of my favorite Beatles songs. And then you have Electric Ladyland, which has like these incredible like psychedelic guitars throughout the entirety of it. I mean, they don't call him the best guitar player of all time for nothing. No, it's because he's the best guitar player of all time. But yeah, that album's so good. Then you have In the Court of the Crimson King, which I don't like as much as most music critics, because I mean, I think I think it's a little similar to some other stuff that was going on at the time. See the Beatles, see Electric Ladyland. But that doesn't mean I don't think it's good. I think it's a very good album. And yeah, I mean, you get like this intense like dark mood that wasn't very common at the time, like see the Beatles. you and I Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, 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 very good album. And then if we look at the two jazz albums, Giant Steps by John Coltrane, that album's also very fantastic. It's a very fantastic, um, you know, not beginner jazz album, but like it's a very good album to like get you into jazz because it has that like very like not stereotypical but normal jazz like structure of like melody, solo, melody, solo, melody, solo. And while it's not my favorite jazz album that I've heard, I think it's still very good and probably a contender for a 10 out of 10. Then there's also the other jazz album, Black Sinner, Lady and the Saint, which is more out there, more experimental, incorporates more instrumentals, and it's very good. And while it relies less on solos, it also has like a more interesting like soundscape that invites you into. But that's the 60s, and I think almost all of these albums are 10 out of 10s. So, without further ado, let's move on to the 70s. So, the 70s, I'm going to award the most adequately rated decade because the albums that we have lined up here are landmarks. They are landmarks. Let's just start it off at the top. The highest rated album of this year is Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. If you listen to this album on any day, on any given circumstance, your day will become 1,000 times better. It has like, I mean, just alone, like Stevie Wonder's voice, his voice and his instrumental prowess, being blind, is so impressive. Like, and the fact that he's like this album is like better than like 99% of the music that people create with their site. So let's take a moment to appreciate that. Did you take a moment? Good. But anyway, yes, this album's incredible. It's like an absolute mood booster. The singing on it's fantastic, and it's just, I mean, yeah, like, Isn't She Lovely? Well, it's like the hit off that album is one of the best songs I've ever heard. Isn't she lovely? Me. I don't know the words, but it's a good song. Next up, we have Wish You Were Here, and I'll talk about Dark Side of the Moon as well because they're both Pink Floyd albums. Pink Floyd is probably the band that like through doing the research, I've become like very, very like interested in, and I want to like dive deeper into their discography because I listened to Dark Side of the Moon before doing this research, and I was like, this is good, but I'm not too interested in like checking out the rest of their discography. Then I listened to Wish You Were Here, and I'm like, this is fire. I need to check out more of this. So then I listened to Animals, which I'm not going to talk about because that's not on this list, and I was like, this is fire. I need to listen to more of this. And yeah, Pink Floyd in general is just so fire, but these two albums especially are so good. Like, Money is probably one of my favorite rock songs. Like, that bass line's so good, and like at the beginning with like the cash register as like the drums, it's so good. And Time as well. Like, while it starts off a little weird, it's incredible. And I mean, like, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, both parts, amazing. Like, and while they're like 12 minutes, like, I have no problem sitting there listening through the entire thing because they're that good. Next up, we have What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. And in my opinion, this entire album feels like one big song. And I don't know if anyone else has said that. And it's not like they flow perfectly together. It just feels like one continuous song, you know? But yeah, Marvin Gaye is probably my favorite vocalist of all time. After listening to this, his voice is just so strong. It's like so powerful, but it's also like he can hit like he has he has a very large range. Like it's very powerful, but I don't feel like it's not like very like in your face, you know? And for those of you who have listened to Marvin Gaye, you probably know what I'm trying to talk about in my limited vocabulary because I am an influencer and I don't have the vocabulary of a normal person. But yeah, Marvin Gaye, what's going on? It's absolutely incredible. And this isn't really like a typical genre that I would be like, "Oh, I love like soul." But I mean, I love this album. I might just go like listen to this like album or like a couple songs off this album right after I'm done recording this video because I just want to hear it. And then to wrap it all up, we have Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which I mean is probably my least favorite from this decade. But that being said, it's still fantastic. Like the concept is very creative. I think it's about David Bowie being an alien, and I don't really know the rest of it. But yeah. And his vocals are very good, and it's like very. It still sounds like very fresh. Like it sounds new, kind of, to a degree. Like. And. Yeah, that's kind of the interesting part of it because the genre is like a very like old like specifically 80s genre, but it sounds kind of new, which is something that I'm like just thinking about now. I'm like Starman sounds like it could have come out yesterday and would still be a smash hit. But anyway, yeah, it's also incredibly fantastic. The vocals to the instrumentation are all like so unique for the time, and they still hold up today, and they're still fantastic to listen to today, and yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say about this decade. I mean, the heavy hitters we have in this decade are crazy. So without further ado, let's go to the 80s. So the 80s is what I would call the decade with the most hidden gems. And it's not like hidden gems are with where it's like, oh, this band with 30,000 monthly listeners just dropped and it's a like 10 out of 10. No, it's more like the bands you wouldn't expect to be in the top 5 or in the top 5. Because like when I say 80s music, you probably think of like Queen, you think of Michael Jackson, you think of Guns N' Roses, you think of AC/DC. So the highest rated album is Remain in Light by the Talking Heads, which if I'm going to be honest, that was my least favorite album. Like throughout this and doing like my all the research, that was my least favorite album. I didn't love it. Like they were experimental in the way like not really like in terms of instrumentation, but in terms of like song structure and like the way they sung. So there's like a couple like spoken word things on here which I'm not the hugest fan of, but I can respect it. And I don't want it to sound like I don't love this album, like I don't like this album. I like this album. It's just like when we're talking about top 5 albums, I don't know about that, you know? Like top 5 album for the decade? I don't know. Like and I'm sure, and it's incredibly influential. I mean, like, without Talking Heads, we wouldn't get Radiohead, and you know how I feel about Radiohead. Actually, I don't know if you guys do know how I feel about Radiohead, but you're about to find out. But yeah, I can respect it, and I do like it a lot. Then we have Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, which, I mean, I wouldn't expect that to, like, I don't think of Kate Bush when I think of 80s music, but this album is incredibly fantastic. There's not much in the 80s that is like Kate Bush's Hounds of Love. Like, no one's singing like Kate Bush. No one has, like, that intense atmosphere of Kate Bush. And her instrumentation is incredibly unique. Like, if you look at a song like Jig of Life, like, there's not too many songs like that. There's not too many, like, pop ballads that include, like, frickin' bagpipes. And I know Running Up That Hill's overplayed, but it's still a fantastic song. And so is Cloud Busting. Cloud Busting's great. You also get Metallica, Master of Puppets. That's something that everyone expected. I mean, I don't know if they expected it to be in top 5 albums, but I think they expect when people think of 80s music, they think of Metallica. And Metallica, Master of Puppets is, I mean, it's an incredibly influential album. It popularized metal. I mean, yeah, and it's also fantastic. That might have been my favorite album from this decade. And yeah, I mean, this album's like, it's hard, it's hype, it's heavy, the instrumentation's epic. I mean, what more can I say about this that hasn't already been said? It's just epic. You also have, I mean, an album that I'm sure everyone expected to be here, Prince and the Revolution, Purple Rain, and that album, it's really good. I mean, what more can I say about it? It's just so good. Prince's voice, it's so good. Purple Rain, I mean, it's considered one of the best songs ever for a reason, and that's because it's one of the best songs ever. I But yeah, I mean, even aside from Purple Rain, every song on here, it's like instrumentally lush and the singing is done really well. It's just like everything on here is so good and it makes for such a good album experience. And finally, we have The Cure's Disintegration, which I feel like is the one of the biggest curveballs on here. Cause I mean, yeah, I didn't really expect The Cure to be on here, but they are. And I honestly like this album because in terms of its mood, it's a little more like alternate. I mean, not in terms of sonically, but in terms of like lyrically, it's a little more like alt rocky. And it's like edgy, and I kind of like that. I kind of respect it in like in a time when like rock was kind of like more like upbeat and let's have fun and like party. You got The Cure doing like some more like edgy stuff, which I'm like, didn't know the 80s did that. And yeah, I mean, and sonically it's like very 80s, but in terms of, and I mean, yeah, but lyrically it's like kind of depressing. And I like it a lot. I didn't really expect to listen to Cure album ever in my life, but I like it a lot. I think it's like it's a 10. But yeah, that's the 80s. It was very unexpected in terms of the collection of records that were in the top 5, but all the records that were in the top 5 were really good. Next up, we have the 90s, which I'm dubbing the decade with the largest variety, because we see rap start to get sprinkled in with albums like Illmatic and 36 Chambers. We see there's a pop album in the mix with Homogenic by Bjork, and then we see the start of alt rock with OK Computer and Grace by Jeff Buckley. And to start it off, Illmatic is one of the most influential rap albums of all time. It's sonically not that like fresh, well, not fresh, but it's not like that interesting or experimental, but I would call it just like a guy rapping incredibly for the length of an album. But it also did like influence the style of rap in like New York for the next decade. And that definitely put some points on it. But yeah, I mean, taken out of like that influence context, it's still incredible, and it's still like I said, a guy rapping incredibly for the length of an album. And then we get 36 Chambers by Wu-Tang, which I like a little more than Illmatic. I'm not gonna lie, which probably isn't even a hot take, but I'm just saying it. But 36 Chambers is also incredible. I think the rapping on 36 Chambers I like a little more, and is a little more like, it's a little more fun to listen to. But yeah, this album's also incredible. It's very similar stylistically to Illmatic because, New York rapping. So the beats are very like non-complex, but the rapping is very complex. And, Cash Rules Everything Around Me, or Cream, is like lyrically a very interesting song, and it's also a very sonically good song. So yeah. Anyway, now we have a pop album in here, which is probably one of my favorite pop albums, Homogenic by Bjork. And Bjork's voice, just to start off, Bjork's voice is very interesting. Like, it's very, like, different from, like, a lot of pop singers. It's not, I wouldn't call it traditionally good, but I also would say I like it a lot. Next, the instrumentals on this album are so unique. Like, they're very electronic focused. They're not like normal, like, they're not normal pop instrumentation. And I don't think any pop singer at that time would be venturing off, like, into this, like, electronic type of soundscape. And to me, this album's a 10. And then we have the alt rock albums. I'll start with Grace by Jeff Buckley, which is an incredible album. It's more like traditional in instrumentation, but it's still very like sad, and it makes me want to cry. And it hits harder after knowing that he died. So yeah, it's a pretty depressing album to talk about, I'm not gonna lie, so I'm not gonna do it for very long, but it does have like the Hallelujah cover off of it, which I think is probably it might be the most famous Hallelujah cover. And I didn't really love Hallelujah until I listened to this album, but yeah. And then we have OK Computer. Radiohead is like my favorite rock artist of all time, and this album's incredible. And if you haven't listened to this album, or if you haven't listened to a Radiohead project, do yourself a favor, sit down, listen to OK Computer, and then come back to this video and keep watching, because that is how much priority this should have. Don't finish this video, listen to OK Computer. I will wait. But yeah, this album's absolutely incredible. I had listened to it before doing all this research. It's probably one of my favorite albums of all time. It's incredible. Like, what more can be said that hasn't been said? They take like this alt rock like hardness that like Nirvana laid out and kind of like mellowed it, but like instead of like the emotion being professed through like heavy instrumentals and like yelly vocals, they professed it through like these dramatic builds. Like, if you see exit music for a film, that's like a class A example. Or like even No Surprises or Lucky or Let Down, like all those songs are like grade A examples of that. And I mean, yeah, they're just like so fantastic. And they do keep a little bit of that like alt rock hardness, which is very fun to listen to, like those like heavy electric guitars done by Johnny, I cannot believe I made that mistake. Dang it. Johnny Greenwood, electric guitar, he's the electric guitarist. Okay, anyway. But yeah, this album's fantastic, so please pause the video and listen to it. Like, that's one of the few albums that I would say pause the video and listen to it. Please. Next up, we have the 2000s, which I'm dubbing the weirdest decade. Yeah, we have our first post-rock album here with Godspeed You Black Emperor by... Wait, no, Godspeed You Black Emperor is the artist. Lift Your Skinny Fists like antennas to heaven by Godspeed You Black Emperor. That's a mouthful. I'm just gonna call it Lift Your Skinny Fists, which isn't much better. But yeah, that's our first post-rock album, and most of the songs on here are about 20 minutes. It's like an hour long and like 4 songs. But this album's unironically really good. Like, the emotion captured throughout like each of these songs is so incredible. And like the And I'll compare them to Sigur Rós for a second, who's another post-rock band. They do a similar thing to Sigur Rós, where it's like, it's not about like the song structure or the catchiness of it. It's about like, in that moment, how the sounds are hitting your ear and do they sound good. Like, it's not about like, oh, this song's so long and oh, blah 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 blah. Like, it's more about like, the song is like an experience. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but for those of you who've listened to it, you get it. And yeah, they just kind of like make some sounds with some instruments that may or may not be normal, and for 20-ish minutes, and they sound good. That's the best way I can describe it. Like, but yeah, the emotion also captured throughout these like 20-minute tracks are is incredible, because they have 20 minutes to like really go through a variety of different sounds. Like, sometimes it's a hard rock song, other times it's very mellow and chill and and like emotional and sad. Like, it's each song is an emotional roller coaster. Next, we have Mad Villainy by Madvillain, or MF Doom and Madlib, which is a very like weird, weird. It's weird. Not rock, rap. It's a weird rap album. But yeah, instrumentally, it's like very interesting, and Doom raps over these beats so well that it's insane. Like, the way he connects words is insane. Like, yeah, like at first he wasn't like for me, because I didn't really like his flow style, but as I like listened to it more, it like grew on me a lot, and then I just love it, you know? We also get Vespertine by Bjork, which is my favorite Bjork, because thematically it's a lot darker than Homogenic. I believe it's about trying to get out of an abusive relationship. Don't quote me on that, because if I'm wrong, that's going to sound really bad. But yeah, I think there are themes of that throughout the album. And yeah, it's all honestly just a very emotional release, lyrically and sonically, but it also keeps up that, like electronic sound that Bjork was like so good with on Homogenic. We also have albums like The Glow Part 2, which is like, it's a folk album, but it also incorporates like some decently heavy instrumental. And yeah, I mean, this was the last album that I listened to for it, and songs like Samurai Swords are like hardly even a folk song. The drums on Samurai Sword are crazy. Oh my gosh, you can barely even hear the vocals, but it doesn't even matter because the drums are hard. But yeah, like, this song kind of has like similar builds to like a Radiohead song, where it builds up to like this dramatic point. And I mean, yeah, it's a very good album, and it's more acoustic than like a Radiohead album or like an alt rock album. So yeah, it's pretty like quaint and like down to earth at some points, but at other points it's very big and large. And and those 2 points can be on the same song, and it's very good. Like, it's so good. And then finally we have In Rainbows by Radiohead, which personally I like a little more than OK Computer. So this is going to happen again. Pause the video, listen to In Rainbows now, and yeah. But yeah, In Rainbows is absolutely fantastic. It has some of my favorite Radiohead songs on it. Like, lyrically, Videotape is one of the best concepts for a song I've ever heard. Like, that song has like grown on me the most, and of like any Radiohead song. And like the concept of like, after I die, I'm still going to be happy because I'll have the memories of my life. and that's like the videotape, the videotape in the song. Like he's like, I'll still have it on my videotape or in my brain. Like I'll still have all these memories in my videotape. And then, I mean, 15 Steps is a groove, Body Snatchers is a groove, Nude, like, has one of the best, like, single, like, vocals from Tom York. And this kind of incorporates, like, their electronic thing that they were doing on Kid A with, like, the alt-rock thing that they were doing on, like, OK Computer and the Bends. And it also, I mean, it incorporates some other stuff, but mainly those two. And it just makes for such a good album experience that it's just not even funny. Next, we go to the 2010s, and this is the decade that I'm most familiar with. And you might be thinking, oh, that's a cop-out superlative. No, it's not, and I'll explain why. I'd listened to 4 out of the 5 albums for this decade pre-doing the research. The new one that I listened to is The Swans, To Be Kind, and I'll talk about that real quick. That's another post-rock album. It's pretty weird. It has a 30-minute song on it, and that 30-minute song is fire! But yeah, The Swans, this album's just really good. It's like, it has those like longer songs, but similar to Godspeed You Black Emperor, it's more about like how the sounds are hitting your ear right now than how the entire song sounds. And it does have those, like, emotional, like, ups and downs. Less so than Godspeed You Black Emperor, but it still has them. And all in all, it's a fantastic record. We also have 2 Kendrick albums, To Pimp a Butterfly and Good Kid, Mad City. Good Kid, Mad City is my favorite album of all time. It's a more accessible Kendrick release, but the story's fantastic. Like, it's the best... It's been called the best concept album of all time for a reason, and that's because it showcases a day in the life of Kendrick as a kid when he's living in Compton, and the way he like sees this theme like through makes this album, as many people have said, like a movie. Then there's To Pimp a Butterfly, where he like changes up his sound entirely and still creates this like groovy amazing release that like tackles themes of like social justice and like corruption in the record in like the music industry. And the way he does it is incredibly fantastic. And we also have albums like Atrocity Exhibition by Danny Brown, which is another rap album that like is very experimental. Like it's very jarring, it's very like abnormal, and it's very like it's but it's still like fun to listen to because of all those things. Like it's not boring. That's the thing. It makes like all this like jarringness and like abnormalness makes this like such a fun release from Danny Brown. And there's also like great features on this. There's a Kendrick feature on Really Dough, which is very good. And I mean, yeah, Danny Brown, just like with this record, he like solidified himself as like one of like the most creative MCs out there. And then finally we have Igor by Tyler the Creator, which is an album that I have on vinyl. But Igor is an incredible concept album that like it's about like Tyler like finding like love, but then like ultimately he can't like have that love, and it's about like that emotional process. But the record like loops perfectly, so it's about like him like continually falling into these pitfalls of like chasing something that he can't have. Which is honestly genius, and sonically this record's very interesting. And while I don't think Tyler has like the best vocals, I feel like that kind of like sinks you deeper into the concept, like the vocals he uses on this album. But yeah, like all these albums I was very familiar with and I loved to death because I had spent a lot of time with them. And that theme will come back later in the video. Except for the Swans album. Swans album was new, but it's fantastic, so listen to it when you get the chance. Now we have the 2020s. And this album comes with a little story. So I was like done listening to every album for this video. Then Magdalena Bay dropped Imaginal Disc, and it became one of the highest rated albums of the decade. So I had to listen to that. And speaking of Magdalena Bay, that album's very fantastic. It's a very good pop album. While I wouldn't say it's a 10, it's very good. And I think it needs more time to grow on me to become a 10, but I think it's very good. And yeah, it has a very interesting instrumental soundscape. And Magdalena Bay's voice, well, it's not good. Well, it's not good. It's not like my favorite. I think for this album and like for its instrumental soundscape, it's perfect. And it's definitely worth a listen. Yeah, there's also JID's The Forever Story. I had listened to this before doing the research. That album's fantastic. JID's flows are so incredible. And he also has a pretty good singing voice, which is represented on this album on songs like 2007 or Cody Blue 31. But yeah, and I mean, my favorite song on this album is Dance Now because it's a banger. And I mean, I also love Surround Sound, but that's the hit, so. But yeah, this album's absolutely fantastic. And while we're on the topic of rap, I will talk about Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, which honestly is kind of out of left field because it's by Little Simz, a British rapper who made this album in 2021. And yeah, it's actually fantastic. It juggles themes of like what does it mean to like be a woman, which I can't relate to because I'm a dude, but it's still very interesting to like look at from an artistic perspective. And it's also like fantastic. Like the instrumentals are very regal and like big, and Little Simz rapping is like very like it's groovy, you know? It's like it's very like fun to listen to her rap. And yeah, I just love it. And then we have the JPEG Mafia album Offline, which is probably the one that I disagree with being put on this list the most because it's not my favorite JPEG Mafia album. I've said this in past videos, but I like JPEG Mafia when he's all the way turned up, when he's like pretty much doing the equivalent of punching you in the face with an instrumental. And this album's not that. As you might infer from the title Offline, it's a toned down JPEG Mafia album, which I'm gonna be honest, it's still very good, but it's not like, oh, great. it's not like exciting, you know? It's not like that JPEG Mafia that I want, you know? So, personally, I would have put some other albums, some other JPEG Mafia albums, like I Lay Down My Life For You, above this. But, you know, it's on here, and it's really good, and it's worth a listen. So, what are you going to do? And then finally, we have Answer Up There, which is probably my favorite from this decade. I don't even know what to call this album, but it does bear some similarities to Neutral Milk Hotel's In the Airplane Over the Seas, in that it's like very emotional, but it's very acoustic, and it incorporates a lot of like horns. But yeah, Answer Up There by Black Country New Road is a fantastic album, and it's very emotional, and it's just like, I don't even know. It's unlike anything I've ever heard except for like Neutral Milk Hotel's In the Airplane Over the Sea, which is a fantastic album. And just like, it's incredibly unique, and for anything that's come out like modern day, and it's just fantastic, and I would say it's a 10 out of 10. Not a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, one of the two. But yeah. Now you might be wondering, after I've given all that praise to all those decades, what is the best decade of music? And drumroll please, there is not a best decade of music. There's no way to objectify this. Like, there's not, like, after I listened to all these albums, there wasn't a clear winner. And you might be thinking, oh, this is just a cop-out. This is just like, I waited all this time for this. Yep. And that's because I'm going to prove a point. Like, people who say music was so much better back then is because they either, one, haven't dug deep enough into the music that is, like, very high rated and very critically acclaimed, and they're just judging based on the songs that are on the radio, or two, have a genre bias and don't like the genres that are getting critical acclaim now. And having that is fine, but you just can't say that, like, one decade is objectively better than the others, because it's not. Like, anyone who, like, is into music can show you a fantastic album that has come out in a decade outside of, like, what you would say is the best decade of music. Like, if I were to walk up to someone and they would say, and ask them what the best decade of music is, and they would say the 80s, I could show them, like, fantastic albums, and I just did show them fantastic albums from outside of that decade. Like, so yeah, that is my rant. There's no objective best decade of music, because, I mean, every decade has something incredible to offer to the musical table. And I think that, like, and I think they all offer something that is equally incredible. And while it may be different, it's still fantastic and worth listening to. So that is my rant. There's no best decade of music. Every decade has done an equally incredible job. And if you guys enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This was my biggest undertaking yet. So I would very much appreciate it if you guys subscribed, because, this has been like a passion project of mine. And comment what videos you want me to do next. I'll probably be toning it down a little bit from now on, maybe making some vinyl videos. But yeah, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.